G'day guys, Tony from GME. Today we're going to be covering the top 5 tips for UHF CB radio. Now, these are intended for beginners, people who are new to the category. So if you're an experienced radio user, this probably isn't the video for you. Remember, as always, to like the video and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with all the latest happenings at GME. So the first tip, we're starting super basic with the PTT button. Now PTT stands for push to talk. All two-way radios must have one. Whether it's a handheld, whether it's a fixed mount, they've all got a PTT button. Now, I'm sure you all think it's really obvious how this works, but unfortunately, we see a lot of first-time users making mistakes. So, it's important to remember to push the button before you start talking, or people will miss the start of your sentences. The other thing to remember is to push the button and hold it down for as long as you're talking. It's not simply push it once and start talking, or people aren't going to hear what you have to say. Now for the second tip, again, related to the way that you interact with the radio. And this is one that a lot of people don't quite understand. So when you pick your radio up and go to talk into it, you obviously press your PTT button. Rather than talking directly into the microphone front on, it's always a good idea to talk across the microphone. This will reduce the likelihood of the microphone popping when you say words beginning with P, and it will also ensure that the transmission is nice and clear, and you don't need to raise your voice when you're speaking into a UHF radio. So there's no need to raise your voice at all, just speak at a normal volume across the microphone and people will be able to hear you nice and clearly. So for the third tip, we're going to talk about range. Now we get asked all the time, how far will my radio transmit? Will I get 10 Ks, 20 Ks, 30 Ks out of it? And as a general rule, we won't answer that question directly because quite simply there's too many variables. UHF CB is line of sight communication. So in perfect conditions, if you're on dead flat ground with no obstructions, you'll be able to get a significant amount of distance out of your radio. But once you start introducing obstructions, things like buildings or cliff faces, anything that will interfere or interrupt that line of sight communication, it's going to reduce your range. So if you need to transmit as far as possible, make sure your antenna's up high, and if possible, you're up high, say on the top of a hill, and you'll get the best possible transmission distance out of your radio. So our fourth tip is related to squelch. Now, if you're new to CB radio, you might not have heard the term squelch before, but all of our radios have a squelch level adjustment on them. And quite simply, that squelch level adjustment is a way of filtering out weak signals. So if someone's right on the edge of the transmission range, you might be able to hear them, but the transmission may come through quite scratchy with a lot of static. If you want to filter that out, you can simply increase the level of squelch and it will reduce the amount of unwanted weak signals being received by the radio. So for our fifth and final tip, we're going to talk about channels. Now on a UHF CB radio in Australia, you've got 80 channels, but not all 80 of them are available for public use. The most important channels to remember not to use are channels 5 and 35. Now these are designated only for emergency use. So obviously in an emergency situation, feel free to transmit on 5 or 35, but if it's general communication that you're using, make sure you avoid those two channels. The designated call channel in Australia is channel 11. So commence your communication on channel 11. Once you make contact with the person you'd like to speak to, agree on another channel to switch to, move to that channel and continue your conversation from there. So that's it. That's 5 tips to get you started with UHF CB radio. Now, as always, if you think there's anything that we've missed or if there's any topics that you'd like us to cover, simply drop a comment below and we'll get back to you as soon as we can.